subscribe and click the notification bell, and I will exorcise your demons. Castles, bridges, the place you call home. Anywhere and everywhere may be haunted. Every time you and your family up and move to a new place, you might wonder to yourself, will this new home be haunted? Will you hear angry voices at night? Will you see figures in the hallway when no one else is home? Will you wake up and see something's face just in front of yours? Enjoy these horrifyingly real haunted places and the terrifying stories that happen there. If you want your story narrated on this show, you can share it with us at darknessprevails.org or stop on by and read thousands of stories. The Blue Boy from TheSpamalot. Location, England. Without bragging too much, my family are of aristocratic heritage, and my grandfather's brother owns Chillingham Castle, a 15th century castle in the north of England. We didn't visit him too often, so when my parents and I visited him in the winter of 2015, I was ecstatic. The 4-hour drive from south to north was uneventful, but as we neared the driveway to the castle, things began to feel strange. For those who don't live in the UK, any time after 4 p.m. in winter is pitch black, and the castle being set in the middle of the woods didn't help in comforting me. The leafless trees set in the darkness conjured up strange shapes in my head. At least I convinced myself that it was just because of the trees. I knocked on the ancient oak front door to be greeted by the bony face of my great-uncle Humphrey, or as he would always correct us, Sir Humphrey of Wakefield. He greeted us with warmth and took us to the dining room, where chefs had prepared a hearty meal, piles of sausages and pork, more than enough for the 4 people it was made for. Half an hour later, my stomach full, I retired to my bedroom. By then, it was around 11 p.m. I wasn't trusted to sleep on the 300-year-old four-posters, so I was left in the guest apartment, something I was perfectly happy with as the drafts in the original rooms were unbearable, especially in sub-zero temperatures. Warm and satisfied, I fell asleep quickly, but my slumber did not last very long. At about 2 or 3 a.m., I woke to see a flash of something, like a blue spark of electricity coming from the corner of the bedroom, behind the TV. I got out of bed and went to check behind it, out of fear of a huge fire starting, only to see a silhouette in the corridor. It was in between the doors for my mother and great-uncle's rooms. I rubbed my eyes in disbelief, expecting it to go away, but instead it remained, fixed in place. With my eyes cleared of sleep, I could now make out a small boy, around the ages of 6 or 7. He seemed to have this blue aura surrounding him. I took a step forward into the hallway in the hopes of getting a better look at this entity, only for it to suddenly snap towards me, facing me head on. The boy's face seemed to go from young and peachy to old and wrinkled like a bag of flesh. This thing's mouth opened inhumanly wide and sprinted towards me. I screamed, leaping to the side, only for this entity to glide through the hallway, right through where I'd been standing. My great-uncle came straight out of his room to see the reason for my screaming. Just as he exited his room, a blue flash came from the wall the boy had run through. Instead of acting shocked or surprised, Humphrey just sighed and smiled. I asked him what on earth that thing was, and he told me it was the Blue Boy. When the castle had been renovated in the 1990s, workers found a hidden room behind the wall in front of my bedroom, only to find it full of the remains of a young boy who was said to have been buried alive in that room. After discovering the remains, the workers sealed them back in the room as a sign of respect for those who had perished. I think this is the reason for the ongoing hauntings. My great-uncle is practically friends with these paranormal things that haunt the castle, or at least he's used to them. After all, he claims to see them on a daily basis. After living there his whole life, I don't think he really cares about them anymore. But that doesn't mean I won't have the living daylights scared out of me every time I see something strange. This is just one of the happenings I've experienced at the castle, and if you don't believe it, research the castle for yourself. I'm visiting Chillingham Castle again in April, so anything that happens, I'll be sure to share it here. The Haunted Bridge, from MrFavorable. Location, Ohio. My name is Aaron. I'm 24 years old. I live in Michigan, and I have many friends all over the US due to meeting many people in major tournaments for the popular trading card game Yu-Gi-Oh! I met a group of my friends from Ohio. I quite frequently go down there to visit them. My friend Sam that lives down there is the main reason I go. He's into ghost hunting, and a lot of his family members, such as his mother, have a knack for finding supernatural places. My first trip down to Ohio was in 2016 to hang out for a couple of weeks. It was August. I took some paid time off to visit these guys for the first time, as we had spent the previous year talking in servers and playing games together. When I arrived, my friend Sam said we should go to the Bridge of Mimi and see if we can get any activity down there. It's also called Screaming Mimi Bridge. The story goes during the Prohibition days, when gangs were very notorious in its time. Mimi ended up having a child, and she wasn't married. She was born into a gangster family. The family was upset she had the child, so they took her to the bridge, and they threw the baby into the water. Sadly, of course, the baby did not make it. A year later, Mimi went back to the bridge and took her own life as she could not bear leaving her child behind. The peak hours for the bridge are said to be between midnight and 3 a.m. So Sam was able to get a few friends together, including me, to go and ghost hunt at this bridge. We went around 1 a.m. because it was kind of a last-minute thing when we discussed it. We get there and we park our vehicles off the bridge as to not block traffic. If cops did come, we wouldn't be in the way. Sam began by asking questions to any possible spirits that were listening. Things like, "Mimi, are you here tonight? If so, please give us a sign." This bridge isn't very large. It's maybe 50 feet to cross the bridge, and we're surrounded by a thick wooded area. If you wanted to jump off the bridge into the river, you could, but I wouldn't recommend it due to the water level being very low, and you might hurt yourself, especially if you land on the rocks below. We all waited in silence after Sam asked his questions. There didn't seem to be a reply. But the bugs and all the wildlife there that were around us before suddenly became eerily quiet. That was when we began to feel actually spooked. Sam proceeded to ask again, "Mimi, if you're here tonight, please show us a sign of some sort." That's when we heard what sounded like small pebbles underneath the bridge being tossed into the water, and then against the wall underneath the bridge. We all froze and looked around at each other, asking if any of us were messing with each other. Everyone shook their heads. They weren't. We all hand-checked each other and nobody had pebbles of any sort. All we had with us were smartphones. Turning on the flashlights of said smartphones, we looked down at the water below us, where the mouth of the bridge was. We could all see underneath the bridge where the broken concrete slabs were, and we all decided that we should scale down about 10 feet and look under the bridge. We all began to climb down. We were soon under the bridge, and it was just more broken concrete slabs, and the water under the bridge was nearly non-existent. We all began to question how we had been hearing the pebble sounds earlier, It had sounded like it was coming directly below us. Puzzled, Sam said that he could feel that she's here, that she's too afraid to show herself. So Sam asked Mimi for another sign. We listened quietly, looking around and waiting to hear more pebbles, but there was nothing to be heard. But that's when we did hear one of our friends gasp, and they said that they saw a white outline of a young woman wearing a white dress with brown hair in the water. We all looked from the mouth of the tunnel into the part of the river that turned more into a pond. And there, I even saw for myself what I assume was Mimi. She was on a bank of the shore, just standing there. I gasped in disbelief. All in a moment, she suddenly vanished. We all proceeded to go back up on the bridge. It was quite the experience for my first time actually ghost hunting, and over the last 2 years, whenever I go back down to Ohio, we go there to ghost hunt to see if we can find more paranormal activity. Sure enough, I went back down in October of 2017 for a Halloween party to catch up with old friends and have a good time. I made the suggestion to Sam that we should go to see Screaming Mimi again, and of course Sam agreed. He loves Halloween, he loves ghost hunting, and he loves getting creeped out. We got a group of about 6 or 7 people together, and we left. We arrived at about 2 a.m., then we parked our car off the bridge so we weren't in the way, just in case other vehicles came through, just like last time. Sam asked the questions again, requesting for signs from Mimi. Much like the last time when I went there, the woods around us began to become creepily quiet, and like clockwork, we heard the sounds of pebbles being thrown under the bridge. It was just like the year before. But this time, Sam was not satisfied with just that. We asked Mimi to do something more powerful, so we knew that we could feel her presence. I think we were getting greedy. A few moments went by, and then we were met with a very new sound. The cries of a child, an infant actually. We stood there in shock, and we all began to ask one another if we were hearing that. Everyone had these horrified looks on their faces. Then the sounds of the pebbles splashing in the water began to be more noticeable. We decided to look down at the water, and there we saw a white outline of a woman in a white dress. She had brown hair just like before. But the most terrifying part was yet to come. In the middle of the night, we had a bright moon that was full and lit the area very well, and from a tree branch, we suddenly saw a large bird come out and start flapping its wings. It was a large, crane-like creature. But what was weird was, despite us all flashing our lights at it, it was all black. It was like a shadow more than a living creature. I watched the bird fly away from us into the night directly at the moon. There were no branches to break my line of sight, but after a few moments the shadow of the bird was just gone. It didn't change its course. It didn't land anywhere. It was simply gone. That wasn't the last of our encounters. You see, Sam and his girlfriend went back to Mimi's bridge one day and parked their car on it. They shut it off, and Sam said he asked if Mimi was there and if anyone would like to speak to him or communicate with them. Sam said that he heard what sounded like a hand slapping the car window in one spot. Then it moved to another spot on the opposite side. And then it began to happen all around the car, like it was a group of people slapping the windows and making the entire car shake. It scared him and his girlfriend pretty bad. They basically just held each other until it all stopped, and they drove home quickly. Beware the haunted bridge in Ohio. Screaming Mimi Bridge. If you ever pass through it or by it, you might just see Mimi herself. What are you? Face in the window. From Michael M. Location: Ayrshire, Scotland. I'm actually an agnostic when it comes to ghosts, but if I hadn't experienced what I'm about to tell you, then I'd probably be a fully blown skeptic. Sitting on the Scottish coastline in Troon, Ayrshire, is a 19th century villa called Crosby Towers, beautifully crafted and in the Italianate style. It is well known in the local area, and you can find pictures of it online, both in its current and former state. Even when it degenerated into a derelict and poorly maintained building, the mansion still looked quite elegant and scary. When we ventured inside on a calm evening in May 2012, it really was your proverbial haunted house. Dusty floors, wooden panels, boarded up windows, a broken down elevator, a creepy dentist chair, and a spiral staircase leading up to a square tower. There was debris everywhere, old chairs and furniture, and the air was rather heavy and musty. It smelled like an old library. My friends were just approaching the foot of the staircase when a loud crashing bang sounded from the top. I was at the back of the queue, admittedly not the bravest of the bunch on this occasion, but the noise and shock will stay with me forever. We bolted out and returned several nights later. You could say that a homeless person or another explorer orchestrated the bang to scare us, but that would seem an unnecessarily severe measure to take. That bang was massive, angry, and sinister. It was not like an object being dropped or thrown. There was way too much force behind it. Still, I would have granted a human cause as the likeliest explanation, were it not for what we would soon discover. There's a room at the top of the staircase, and although none of us stepped inside it, let alone the whole second floor, we knew there was a window in that room which looked out into the backyard. A photograph we took of the window revealed something uncanny. What appeared to be a narrow white face with black slits can be seen peering down at us, as if it didn't want to be seen. Now here's the important point. This face, or whatever it is, didn't appear in other photos of that same window, which were taken on the same night, meaning the thing was literally there, and then it wasn't. It can't have been a handle or part of the actual frame. When we reconsider the bang and add the photo into the equation, putting 2 and 2 together, it becomes pretty clear that the bang was caused by something in that room, which did not want us coming upstairs. As for the history behind the house, I've done my research. People have perished there. Renowned whiskey maker Alexander Walker, whose brands are now marketed all over the world as Johnny Walker Whiskey, is listed as passing in the house on 16th of July 1889, as was his wife Isabella McKimmy, in 1902 at Crosby Tower. Obviously, this is an alternate spelling or a misspelling of the house's real name. The property later went on to become a care home, and then, bizarrely, it became the property of the Church of Scotland. It makes for some intriguing reading. And don't just take my word for it. All this information can be found online with a quick Google search. I still dream about that house from time to time, regretting how I never took the opportunity to explore the place more fully or reach the top floor. The building was recently modernized into a block of flats, which I think looks terrible. For the sake of the mental well-being of whoever now lives there, I hope the ghosts aren't permanent residents. The Faceless Man, from Twisted Peach. Location, Colorado. In my family, the paranormal is often normal. I've had several encounters of my own. It may stem from my heavily Native American background, or from living in one of the most haunted states. But here goes. I had just turned 4. My parents moved me from the closet under the stairs to my eldest sister's room. Yeah, I was kept in a closet until I was 4. My crib fit perfectly. My parents were directly above me, and this made it easy for them to tell when I was awake or not, and it maintained their privacy. It was a fantastic room for an energetic toddler. It was in the back corner of the house. It had a waterbed 2 to 3 feet tall, and 2 sets of 3 drawers on top of one another. There was a tunnel that ran behind the drawers, a perfect clubhouse for my exploits of toddlerdom. With a small window at the foot of the bed that looks into the backyard, it was a great new place to stay. I was rolling around on this massive waterbed. I was trying to make the falling sound with my sliding whistle. You know, the sound from the Looney Tunes show, every time the Roadrunner tricks Wile E. Coyote over a cliff. That's when I noticed there was a man looking in at me. He was at the window. At that age, I was curious rather than scared, so I walk over to the window and I slide it open. That's when I noticed that his face is completely white and featureless. I'm not talking albino, it was just paper white. He didn't have eyes or a mouth, but his jaw still moved as he talked. You could clearly tell where he was looking as well. Weirdly enough, the shade of white he was seemed to absorb all the light near him. Imagine matte black, but white. But yeah, he spoke to me. "Where did you get that whistle? You play it well." I was happy to reply, following up with, "My auntie bought it for me. I can make cartoon noises." I proceeded to haphazardly blow into the whistle. The man tried to speak over the sound, but soon gave up. As soon as he stopped trying to speak, I stopped playing the whistle. Then he started up again. "You know, you'll never be happy with these people. They don't love you. You're just a toy. Would you like to come with me? You'll be very happy." I remember looking back at him, and I replied, "You're stupid. I'm happy, you're dumb." I handed him my whistle and demanded that he fix it because it stopped playing any tunes. I didn't think it was his fault though, I just thought that I had broken it, and that an adult would know how to fix it. My mom, realizing that I'm talking to someone, shouts to me from a different room, "Who are you talking to?" I think she was in the kitchen. I looked back to the man and he said my uncle's name to me. Then he walked away. In my mind from that point on, he was only very fuzzy in my memory. It wasn't until recently, for some reason, that I remembered his faceless face. I wonder what he was. A fairy, perhaps. Another resident of our haunted house. Who knows? But why did he have to keep my whistle? Rhode Island Vampire, from Kelsey R. Location, Exeter, Rhode Island. My story starts in October of 2016. My ex-boyfriend, Ricky, wanted to go to Mercy L. Brown's grave in Exeter, Rhode Island. If you don't know the story, I'll share that with you now. In the 1800s, there was this scary disease taking people. You see, when Mercy L. Brown's passed away, her family was strangely falling ill one after the other after that. They blamed the late Mercy for the phenomenon. Out of fear, they dug up her remains and discovered that her body still had fluids pumping through it. So they removed her heart and burned it on the stone near her grave. Since then, it's rumored to be haunted, a hotspot for sightings of Mercy to get revenge on those who disrespect her. Now that brings us to my story. I've been fascinated by the paranormal and history since I was 9. When I turned 18 and with a new license, I was ready to go. Ricky had been there a lot of times and knew exactly where to take me. Mind you, I was a bit of a scaredy cat when it came to things like this. I won't sleep alone without a light on and some kind of background noise, with my door shut and locked. Something I've always done since I can remember. So we were driving into the cemetery. It was 2 a.m. I shut off my headlights and drove in further slowly. Ricky then says, "Stop right here. Get out with me." I told him I didn't agree to getting out at all, only to just come down here. We continued to bicker about going out there or not, and actually visiting Mercy. After about half an hour of going back and forth, I finally agreed to get out, but I grab my emergency flashlight first. I walk hesitantly to the grave. It looked exactly as it did in those pictures that I saw. The only things missing were the 19 pennies. Out of respect and fear of upsetting Mercy, I run back to my car and get 19 pennies out, placing them on her grave like I remembered from the pictures. I left them as a sign of respect and an offering. I turn around to see Ricky, smoking, and I look at him with disgust and disappointment. Smoking in the middle of a cemetery seemed disrespectful. But that's when I noticed someone walking around behind him in the dark, and they didn't have a flashlight. Now, this was around the time of the clown scares. We were that typical horror movie couple to get taken first, so I had no intentions of joining those in that cemetery. I quickly jumped into the car and sped out of there with Ricky. When we were a decent amount of way away from there, Ricky put some music on and began to jam out. I dropped him off at his house at 3:30 a.m. I'm on my way home, which is about a 10-minute ride. This is where things get creepy. I look at the clock. It's 3:33 a.m., an odd time in the middle of the witching hour. I just happened to look in my mirror just after that, and I swear to God, I saw a girl. One that looked very close to the scare pop-up from YouTube in the trunk of the Volvo station wagon. I started swerving all over the street. I regained control as fast as I could, and when I looked back, she was gone. I looked back and kept looking back, and she wasn't there anymore. I was so horrified. I parked my car once I got home and left everything in it. I just wanted to get back inside. The next day, I checked my car. There was a slight dent to the bumper of my car, and my trunk was a bit messy, which was definitely not how I left it. Since that day, I've only been back 3 times. Each time I leave a peace offering and pay my respects, and always chat with respect. Ricky and I never talk about that night, and we broke up shortly after. We're still good friends, but we both never suggest going back there for adventure. Haunted Jefferson County. From NightAndCaves. Location, Missouri. This takes place in Jefferson County, Missouri, specifically Fenton, High Ridge, and Cedar Hill. It's about my mother, her 3 sisters, and her parents. They ended up living around some Indian burial mounds, which are said to be the resting places of important Indian leaders. Anyway, before they ever tried to build their own place, my mother, her 3 sisters, and her parents lived in a small apartment, as they would call it, in the middle of the woods. It was a very calm area. Not many lived out there, and it was just what my grandparents wanted. However, while they were waiting for their actual house to be built, still living in that apartment, they came across a human bone. They didn't know that at the time. My grandfather, being a hunter, even tried to check to see if it was a deer bone, but he could not find any similarities and simply threw it away. While they would dig the foundation of their new home, my mother and her sisters would be running around the woods and playing to pass the time. That summer, they found an arrowhead at the same place. All of the sisters found arrowheads, and excitedly they showed it to their parents. Now, skip a few years after the house was complete, and everyone was comfy in the new place. One day, my mom was home alone. Her sisters were out with friends, and her parents were out shopping. She was watching TV. Everything was fine and dandy until she saw something run down the hallway out of the corner of her eye. She was supposed to be home alone, like I said. She called out, "Mom?" There was no reply. Then she tried her dad, her sister's names, but still no reply. My mom then sat back down and decided to ignore it. Just the sound of the TV filled the room until she heard a cupboard swing open. Plastic bowls tumbled to the floor as my mom got up and bolted to the kitchen to witness the mess. The next strange thing that happened was with my grandma. It was her day off. My grandpa was out working on cars, and my mom and her sisters were at school. Downstairs, my grandma was doing some laundry. She was bringing up a basket of clothes. When she passed the kitchen, she heard something smash to the ground. She quickly walked back to see what it was. She peered into the kitchen and was confused to see 3 mugs from the sink shattered on the floor. My grandma dropped the basket and called my grandpa as the two tried to figure out what could have taken the 3 mugs out of the sink like that and just dropped them. Soon they were all paid to leave that property, which they agreed to in a heartbeat thanks to the strange incidents. They soon moved to Cedar Hill and built an even bigger house than before. After they finished completing this one, everyone was finally relaxing, but something caught my grandpa's eye one day. In the newspaper, they were reading that while the construction crew responsible for building the new stores in the area where the old place was that my grandparents used to live in, they began to find full-bodied human skeletons. It was so bad, the construction was halted in the area, and archaeologists had to come in and take the bones away safely. Not long after that, a Walmart was built in its place, right in the middle of all the mounds. That would be the end of the story if my grandma didn't tell me this over the weekend. When she and my grandpa were putting deer meat in the basement freezer, they began to hear heavy footsteps. The thing is, though, their kids were at school, and you need to be really heavy to have audible footsteps in that home to be heard downstairs. After investigating, they didn't find anyone. Later that day, one of their daughters, Summer, runs up the gravel hill waving a rock around. She's yelling excitedly, "Look, Mom, Dad, I found an arrowhead." The Yowie that stalks the back roads. From Trevor. Location: New South Wales. I used to be an interstate truck driver that tends to send you to some isolated and creepy locations on its own. I was driving the truck and trailer up what was little more than a dirt road, coming out of Lithgow in the Blue Mountains in New South Wales. The road wound its way past the State Mine Museum and off deeper into the backcountry to an area that has a managed forest. So one side of the forest is just dense Aussie bush, and the other side was row upon row of managed forest. It was creepy as heck, even in the daytime. I had delivered the small bulldozer on the truck to a logging site and was on my way back towards Lithgow when I ran out of driving hours. So I decided to pull over for a nap. It would have been around 1 or 2 in the morning when I woke up, and I dragged my sorry self into the driver's seat to fill in my logbook. I had left the interior light off because it was a full moon, and there was more than enough light to work with. As I was filling in my logbook, I noticed a man coming out of the managed forest on the opposite side of the road. It was maybe 100 meters further down the road. I figured if he needed help, he would come over to the truck, so I went back to my paperwork. You know that feeling you get when something isn't right, and the hair stands up on the back of your neck? I got that. Upon looking up again, I noticed that the man was right in front of my truck, only a few feet away. But what immediately struck me was the sheer size of this man. To put it into context, I had the perfect size reference. The hood of my truck is around 6 feet 6 inches off the ground, and it barely came up to this thing's chest. The creature, who was obviously not a man, seemed curious what this big metal rig was that was in its territory, and was peering straight at me through the windshield. I felt one of those fight-or-flight instincts, and instead of sitting still, I slammed the starter button and hit every light the truck had. High beams, spotlights, everything. The old Mac was air start, so it screamed like a banshee, and then roared as I started revving it up to get the air back up so I could get the brakes off and leave. The creature did the most human-like thing I've ever seen. It stepped back from the roaring thing and raised its hand, and it was a hand, to shield its eyes from all the lights. Its eyes reflected red from the lights, sort of like a cat's do. Then it took off, bounding into the shrubs on the side of the road. I got the heck out of there. Didn't even bother with a walk-around inspection because there was no way I was getting out of that truck again. Not until I got back to the lights of town. I've been back there once since then. A couple of friends and I were down that way, and we drove that road to have a poke around, to look at the ruins of the mining industry, that sort of thing. I felt uneasy the entire time, but thankfully, I didn't see it again. That place gives me the creeps to this very day. Possible Deer Man. From TheChainSomkingRaptor. Location: South Wales. It was late March of 2018. Me and my friends had been goofing all day, just being general teenagers with nothing better to do. It was coming to 6:30 p.m. to 7 p.m., and me and my 3 other friends were trying to find a way back to our homes from wherever we had found ourselves. My friend Matt used Google Maps to see what the fastest route back was. We had to walk through a woodland trail, which was fine. Wales hasn't got any wolves or bears, and the trail was usually well populated by cyclists, dog walkers, and joggers. But this was early spring, just coming out of winter, and the sun had already set with its dim blue glow filling the sky as a mix of oranges and reds collided with it. It was cold. The remnants of the best from the east still covered the ground with large chunks of ice, and snow littering the ground, and patches of snow still covering the leaves. Our hot breath filled the air with vapor. This woodland trail was built over an old railway line that closed in the 60s due to the government cutbacks and unpopularity. It was a very popular trail for cyclists, dog walkers, and joggers alike, as I said before. Heck, I still cycle down that trail from time to time, but after my recollection of what happened in this story, I think I'll refrain from going down the trail ever again. Anyway, the trail stretches on for roughly 4 miles in the shadow of a huge mountain it's set below. On the right, you can get a glimpse of towns roughly 3/4 of a mile away from the trail. There's a vast array of small mammals populating the area, from squirrels to hedgehogs, but nothing larger than that. We were roughly 1.5 miles deep into the trail now. The faint echoes of car engines roaring filled the valley and reminded us that we were still in the 21st century. It had gotten darker now, with that mystifying but faint white to blue glow filling the evening sky. It was getting darker to see. One of the members of our 4-person group, Shannon, speaks up. "This wasn't a good idea," she says. "We're too far in now. You should have thought about calling your parents if you wanted to get picked up," Matt replied. "Well, when you said it wouldn't take long, I thought you meant like it was going to take like a few minutes," she snapped in response. "If you want to walk back alone, be my guest, but we're going to keep going," Matt spoke. Shannon didn't reply. The sun had fully gone down now. All remnants of natural light had been vanquished. The only light that filled the sky was the dim white glow of the distant towns and villages deeper down in the valley. Me and Matt had our smartphone flashlights turned on now, but since we didn't know that there was an actual flashlight app on our phones, we had to use the cameras. The lights didn't do much good though, with them only lighting roughly 3 to 4 meters in front of us. We were roughly halfway through the walk at this point, since it had been 40-odd minutes since we had started our walk back. You could say we were past the point of no return. At that moment, I started to notice things. The distant echoes of civilization had faded. The lack of noise had made me more aware of other sounds. Birds quietly chirping as they settled in trees. Our other friend, Kevin's, labored asthmatic breathing. But I also heard something else to my right. A faint, quiet rustling. It was the kind of rustling where someone was trying to reposition themselves, whilst trying not to be heard. I specifically remember that moment of the faint rustling. I don't know what I was thinking to not even bring it up to my friends. Well, I guess they might have thought I was paranoid, but I knew what I heard. That wasn't a woodland creature running through the brush. It sounded as if it didn't want to be heard. But once we had left the area of the rustling, I didn't hear it again. It was merely a couple of minutes later when all 4 of us pointed our heads to the left, when we heard it. Not rustling, instead it was heavy impacts on the damp forest floor. They were rapid, and they were getting closer. We were petrified in fear. We were just kids after all, and we had never experienced something like this in our lives. Just as the footsteps reached the edge of our flashlights, we heard it make a sharp turn to its left. It sounded like 4 hooves impacting the concrete path directly in front of us now. Me and Matt turned our flashlights toward it. As we shone the light on whatever's standing merely meters away, it walks into the light. It appeared to be a buck deer, but 3 things had me unnerved and anxious. 1 being it's a deer, 2 being the deer are not found in this area where we were. They're more north of South Wales than down south. And 3 was its posture. Deers have a stance that give them their whole identity. It's elegant, prideful looking. But this was like no deer I've seen before. Its legs were too far apart. It was more like a man that was standing on his hands and feet pretending to be an animal. The neck was way too short, too human. And its eyes, God, where most animals have pupils that take up their whole eye, this deer didn't. It was more like a man's eyes were ripped from him and placed straight into the skull of this deer. I made eye contact with it, its piercing blue man-like eyes staring back at me. Suddenly, it bolted to the left at roughly 6 to 10 miles per hour. The way it ran was human too, placing 1 hoof in front of it as well as an opposite back hoof as it scuttled away. Scuttled instead of bounding like a deer would. We didn't talk about it. We didn't talk at all after that. We just shared glances at each other as if to say, "You saw that too, didn't you?" The rest of the walk was silent, half because we didn't know what to say, and the other half being we wanted to listen in case it wanted to come back, maybe to finish us off. It took another 40 minutes of silent walking and sudden aims of our flashlights in the dark forest, but as soon as we caught glimpses of the warm orange glow of a housing estate's streetlights, we made a mad dash to get back to civilization and safety. We didn't talk to each other for months. We barely even shared glances. We couldn't tell people what we saw because it was literally too unbelievable. Kevin tried to speak up about it once, but he was just put down and dismissed by everyone he knew, besides us. We've only recently tried to get back into our friendship group, but it's a struggle to stay together with what we know. I've no idea what I saw that day. I don't know if it's a skinwalker, even though I'm in Britain, or if it's something else. Maybe the most bizarre and deformed case of a deer that's still alive that you can think of. Or heck, maybe it's someone way too immersed in a furry persona. I just really don't know. Monster in the Woods. From Andrew. Location: unknown. I was 13 years old, living in a medium-sized town close to a forest reserve. My family and I often went walking down those trails. They curve up and down in every which way, so it's sometimes hard to see ahead. At the time of this story, it was October, but there were still leaves on the trees. One day after school, I came home and put my bag down on the ground. I went to the kitchen, which overlooks the backyard. In the backyard, there was some creature the size of a grown man on the ground, about 10 feet away from me. Even though it was still moderately bright outside, the thing was pitch black. It was like a shadow peeled itself off the ground and had crouched down. All my breath was taken from my lungs, and I just stood there. Eventually, it looked at me, and it froze too, black eyes drilling into my soul. Then it stood up and revealed its legs. They were unnaturally long. With impossible speed, it ran towards the fence and jumped over. I was so shocked that I just stood there with a shocked expression on my face. I soon broke out of it, and being the stupid teenager I was, I ran outside onto the street, looking both ways on the left. I saw it again. It glanced back at me as it ran down the street. It eventually ran down the path to the forest reserve, and I followed. Walking down the path, I noticed something weird. All the sounds of the forest had gone silent. I was very weirded out by this, but kept on walking. About halfway down the path, I spotted it once more. That thing was standing over the remains of a deer in the middle of the road, feeding on it like some sort of scavenger. I again couldn't move as I was frozen in shock. Then it looked over and spotted me and let out the loudest, most ear-splitting screech I'd ever heard. Then it began to run towards me. I was now filled with regret as I began to run back. When I made it to the entrance of the trail, out of breath, I looked back and saw it close behind me. I managed to make it home before it got to me, and I slammed the door and collapsed on the couch. I was exhausted and terrified. It walked around the house for some time but soon left. When my mom got back, I'd kept this from her, knowing that she wouldn't believe me or she would keep me from going outside due to the danger. I've never told anyone, and I hope this is the right place to share this. I've never seen it again, but deep down, I think I want to. For today's final story, I have a treat for new subscribers and old subscribers alike. The following is probably the most famous story I've ever told on this show, and you'll either remember it when I read the title, or you'll be ready for quite the chilling epic of a story. A tale you'll never forget. Prepare yourself. This is The Lantern, the Boatman, and the Laughing Children. From Joshua LaRue. Location: Sugarloaf Lake, Oklahoma.
I am a 32-year-old man, yet it is broad daylight as I write this, because what I'm about to share haunts me to this day, to the point that merely thinking about it, or in this case typing this memory, is enough to send chills down my body and make me feel like a terrified child. I have only told this story to a handful of people over the last 10 years because of how terrifying an experience it was for me, but I feel like it can be therapeutic to get it off my chest and share it with others. Maybe others have had a similar experience. To tell this story and to give it justice, I have to tell you of an experience that happened 3 years before the terrifying encounter this post is about. Buckle up, this will be a long one, but definitely not boring. My name is Joshua, but I will change the names to protect the privacy of the others involved in this story. I live in Arkansas, and in the late 2003, near the middle of fall, right before it started getting really cold, my wife and I were invited to camp with a friend of mine and his girlfriend at Sugarloaf Lake in Oklahoma. I say camp, but the actual plan was to meet at Sugarloaf, and my friend, we'll call him Bob, wanted to take me and my wife around to some paranormal places in the Sugarloaf area. So we got there around 7 at night. I was driving a white Ford 1996 F-150, and Bob was in his 1980-something white Celebrity. It was really a piece of crap vehicle. Anywho, it was late dusk, becoming dark, and we all climbed into Bob's car. He took us around the area, first to an old abandoned house, but other than some raccoons rustling around, it was a 2-hour waste of time. Then he took us to a graveyard that was supposed to be haunted. Again, it was a bust. Then we went to an old church that was run down and supposed to be haunted as well. Once again, yawn. At this point, it was getting close to midnight, and my wife and I were getting pretty bored. I spoke up to Bob saying, "Man, this really hasn't been that freaky of a night." And that's when Bob smiled, saying he was saving the best for last. He handed me a Polaroid picture of a hillside covered in trees and daylight. I asked him what it was, and he asked me if I saw a house or any type of light pole or anything in that picture. To which I replied, no. He took the picture back and said that's because there isn't, and there are no power lines either. About this time, he turned down an old dirt road and passed a small house. Then after that, it was 2 miles down an old dirt road with woods on one side and a barbed wire fence on the other, with about 2 acres of field connecting to a wooded hillside. Nothing else to light the night except the full moon above us and the clear, starry sky. After what seemed like forever, he stopped the car and told us all to get out. We did as he asked. He walked us to the side of the car where the fence, field, and wooded hillside were. He looked at his cell phone, which his phone and mine had no signal. This was 2003 and this area had no cell towers. But he looked at his phone and said it was 11:57 and told us all to watch the middle of the hillside. Even at complete dark, I could tell this was the same field and hillside from the picture. 2 minutes go by and nothing has changed. Then at exactly midnight, a small light flickers on in the middle of the hillside. A chill runs down my spine as the four of us watch this small light, which to me looked like an old kerosene lantern, beginning to move, sway back and forth. We sat down and watched in complete silence for what seemed like several minutes, when I finally spoke up and asked what the story behind this was. Bob replied that he did not know, but locals had told him that at midnight every night this lantern will light up and sway back and forth through the woods until the sun comes up, and that's when it disappears. Nobody knew what the story was. At the time, I was a 19-year-old guy who did not think anything could scare me or hurt me. So since we were there with no houses around, I yelled out to it, "We see you! Wow, you're so scary with your little lantern." Then Bob shushed me, but it was too late. My wife suddenly screamed and pointed. I was laughing, but my laughing stopped as I looked to the hillside to see the lantern swaying back and forth. It was now moving down the hillside to the field at an unhuman pace. Gliding, it began to speed across the field towards our car. We didn't stick around to see what it was, because within seconds we were in the car and flying down the dirt road back to the lake. We looked back to see the lantern moving slowly back up the hillside to where it first appeared. The ride back was quiet. That was until Bob spoke up saying, "Crap, I forgot to put gas in earlier, and the only store around is closed." If we decided to go back out anywhere, it'd be best to take my truck until he could get gas in the morning. At that point, he only had about 1/8 of a tank. I said okay, and a few minutes later we arrived at Sugarloaf Lake. We had parked by the lake docks, and we dropped my tailgate and sat and talked about what had just happened. Bob's girlfriend was pregnant at the time and told him she was hungry. He told her we had brought some snacks, but she said she needed actual food. But since the local store was closed, he asked if we could take my truck to the next town to get some food, because his car would not have enough gas to get us to that town. I obliged. We shut our cooler, put the tailgate up, and loaded into my truck. I turned the key, and nothing happened. My truck was dead. Deader than dead. No ding, no lights, no clicking noise, nothing. For all intents and purposes, you would think the alternator was out. This was very strange, and after the night we had, it made us all feel uneasy. We stepped out of the truck and popped the hood. We pulled Bob's car around to the front and attempted to jump my truck with his car. And this is where it gets even weirder. As soon as we connect the jumper cables to his battery and to mine, his girlfriend starts his car, and within a second, the cables in between the connectors start to smoke. And in a flash of fire, they burn up within seconds. The cables were nothing more than bits of melted rubber and ash, with only the end clamps still on the batteries. Bob runs and turns off his car, and we take the clamps off the batteries. We look at each other in this eerie moonlight. Now, there are not any light poles around either, and we both get a bad feeling at the exact same time, as we suddenly realize we had been hearing a distant noise in the lake that was getting louder. It sounded like a boat motor. Now, like I said, this was the time of year it was starting to get cold, especially at night. We were bundled up, as it was, and we were standing still on land at night, but somebody was out on a boat, after midnight, when it had to be chilly as all get out with the wind hitting them. And from the sound of this motor, it was getting pretty fast. But we didn't see anything. That is until the boat was about 50 yards away and a very bright spotlight comes on, momentarily blinding us all. Bob and I tell the women to get into his car and lock the doors. I reach into the bed of my truck, and I give Bob a tire tool. I grabbed one for myself. I did work at a tire shop and had all kinds of tools of the trade in my truck. We are standing in front of the vehicles in the middle. The hoods were up on both as the boat pulls up to the dock, and two heavily bearded men in their 30s and 40s step out of the boat and walk up. It's hard to give an accurate description as their spotlight was still pointed at us, and it covered the men in an eerie shadow whilst blinding Bob and I. They looked at us and at our vehicles, and one glances in the direction of the car at the women, then back at us. He lets out a small chuckle. "You fellers got some sort of car trouble?" one asks as he lights up a cigarette. "Yeah, but it's nothing we can't handle," I stammer. The guy with the cigarette sniffs the air and looks down between Bob and I's feet and sees the still smoking ashes of what was the jumper cables. "Looks like it was more than your pussy jumper cables can handle. Y'all sure you don't need some help? We got some tools on the boat that I think can fix you guys' problem right up." Then the other man who had chuckled in the beginning says, "Fix 'em right up." I am speechless at this moment, probably with my mouth hanging open. I can't remember as the two men walk back to their boat, and we hear what sounds like chains rattling around as we try to make out what they're doing, but the spotlight is so blinding we can't see. But those chain noises were enough. Bob looked at me, and without saying a word, we both jumped in his car and drove the hell out of there. For the next few hours, we drove to a populated area of houses, which really wasn't much in this rural area. We were pretty much stuck in this place since we had very little fuel. Yet we all sat in the car mostly quiet, looking around in all directions in near panic, thinking at any time those men could find us. Bob would turn his lights on every now and then, thinking he had seen some movement in the dark. After a while, the women fell asleep, and Bob and I talked about how freaking weird this whole ordeal was. And he laughs at me, saying, "I told you it would be a scary night. I just didn't know it'd be this sort of scary." At this point, the paranormal lantern wasn't even the main thing freaking me out. But the men never showed, and eventually the morning was on its way, and it was about 20 minutes until sunrise, and Bob asked if I wanted to go see the lantern, to see if it really disappears at sunrise. I asked if he was sure he had enough gas, and he said yeah, the local store opens up in about an hour, so we should be fine. I tell him in that case, yeah. We wake up the women and drive back to the hillside. We get there with about 4 minutes left until sunrise. We still see the lantern swaying in the woods. Bob looks over to me and I smile. I do the motion for zipping my lips and we all watch in wonder as right at sunrise, the lantern slowly fades away to nothing. After this, we get back in the car and drive back to the lake, feeling a bit safer now. When we get there, there's no sign of the boat, and the hood of my truck is still up, doors are all locked. On a whim, I tell Bob I'm going to try to start the truck one more time before he drives us somewhere. And I'll be damned, the truck started right up with no hesitation or problem. We all went our separate ways, happy to have seen the sunrise and counting our blessings and swearing to leave the paranormal investigating in this area to others. And swearing that we never wanted to come back to this area and run into those boat people again. However, all things fade with time, even fear and common sense. 3 years later, Bob, who I haven't seen in almost 2 years at that point, calls me up and says he has a proposition for me. He goes on to tell me he has a group of himself and 3 other Wiccans who go out and do seances in haunted places. He asked me if I would be willing to film their sessions in the haunted places. It was for their records and they would pay me well for the service. I am no Wiccan, but I have always loved the paranormal. Even after what I went through at Sugarloaf, I still had an itch to scratch when it came to getting scared and dealing with the paranormal and the unknown. So I told him yes, I would love to film for them, but I had no interest in joining in. I was just okay with watching and just getting to be out there looking into the paranormal once more. So of course my next question was when and where are we going to do this first? When he answered me, I got a terrible gut feeling, and I wished so much that I had trusted my gut and told him I had changed my mind. You remember that lantern light out near Sugarloaf? He asked me as if there was any way I could ever forget. Yeah, I stammered. Why do you ask? I told my group the story and they want to do the ritual there, to see if we can contact that spirit and find out why it's there and what it wants, Bob replied. I don't know, man, I said. Oh, come on, Josh, trust me, you'll be safe. I'm going to pay you $250 just to sit there and film it, he retorted. At the time, I was about to become a father and money was tight because diapers, formula, and the like cost a fortune. Not to mention it was mine and my new wife's first kid, so she had been going crazy spending money on not just the necessities but also buying only the top-of-the-line baby products, like toys, a crib, a playpen, baby monitors, a stroller, car seat, a combination pack and play-changing table, a diaper genie, and designer baby clothes. So because my wife was putting us into the poorhouse, I had to weigh out my fear of the area he wanted to go back to, with how important it was I make all the extra money I could. So against my better judgment, I accepted the offer, and a week later, I was in the same beat-down celebrity Bob was driving 3 years before. This time with Bob, 2 guys and a girl that were complete strangers to me. They each dressed very gothic and had these pentagram necklaces or something of the sort. It was 11:50 when we got there, and the 4 of them sat in a tight circle. I was behind them to the right, about 5 feet from the barbed fence that was in front of the field that led to the hillside, and my back was to the hillside and bushes at the fence line. I was filming my friend's circle as they all started chanting something. Again, as I have been typing this entire post, I have been getting knots in my stomach knowing that I was coming to this part of the story. This part haunts my dreams and even my waking hours to this day. I'm going to do my best for you to describe how the following events unfolded, though I know mere words cannot do justice to the pure terror that ensued or how horribly horrific the events sounded and were. So when reading or listening to this, turn your imagination all the way up and believe me when I say, up to this point in my life, I was interested in the paranormal. It was a fun hobby to go out ghost hunting or getting myself spooked or whatever. But after this night, I never looked at the paranormal as fun or interesting anymore. I show it respect and stay as far away from it as possible. And as much as I dread it, I will now finish telling this story. As his group is chanting, Bob lights up this huge candle in the middle of them and opens some sort of book. It's not like a scary antique spell book or anything, it looks like a newer hardcover. Anyway, he starts reciting words from it. Then he looks at his phone and tells his group to be quiet and to look at the hill. I turn the camera and at midnight on the dot, the lantern appears. One member of Bob's group blurts out, "Cool." I roll my eyes since the way these people were dressed and the way they carried themselves, the word cool did not seem to fit in their vocabulary. Then Bob says to his group to join hands as they attempt to communicate with this spirit. I hesitantly turn my back to the light, and I continue to film the group as they began again chanting, and Bob reads from the book. Then they start asking questions and hope that the spirit will respond. About this time, a wind picks up and Bob's candle goes out. He tells everyone to hold on and tells me, "Cut the camera for a minute." I oblige and stop recording, and I watch as Bob tries his lighter and 2 lighters from the group, but none of the lighters are working. I'm sitting down watching the group when I start hearing a rustling behind me. I jump up, leaving the camera on the ground, and I spun around. Bob and his group are preoccupied with the candle and lighter problem, and as I spin around, I am blinded by the brightest light I've ever seen. What I believe was the lantern up close and personal. But as quick as it appears, the light is gone, and the lantern is nowhere to be seen. If it really was the lantern that blinded me, it had moved from the hillside across the field and right behind me with me not realizing it within the span of maybe 30 seconds. The thing was fast. I looked around for the lantern on the hillside, and there was nothing there. It's only 12:15 or so, and the light has always stayed until sunrise. At this moment, the wind quits blowing, and I hear Bob's lighter finally flick, and I see it light up. And I mutter to the group, "Guys, did you just see that?" They all turn around and ask what I'm talking about, but before I can answer them, we are all stopped dead in our tracks by a distant laughter. It's coming from seemingly nowhere and everywhere around us, but distant at the same time, like far off. This is no ordinary laughter. This laughter sounds like the laughter of hundreds, maybe even thousands of children. It haunts me this very moment. As I type this, I'm looking around the room I'm in. Whenever I think or talk about this experience, I can vividly remember that terrifying sound and hear it in my head. And I can't help but think about how, if you add the word S at the beginning of laughter, it spells slaughter. The best way I can describe this laughter is for you to imagine listening to a large group of kids singing "Row, row, row your boat." You know how one kid will start and seconds later another will join in, starting at the beginning of the song, and so on and so forth. Well, this sounded like, I said, hundreds or thousands of children laughing, as if one would start laughing and seconds later another would. And that pattern went on in an endless loop. I'm not saying the laughter sounded like the song "Row, row, row your boat." I'm saying they laughed in unison and around, just like kids do when singing that song. It kept going, and the laughter was only getting louder and closer. There was sinister laughing, goofy laughing, giggling all around us, coming in all directions. I was so scared that I was shaking. I couldn't run. I was spinning around and around, looking off into the distance. This couldn't be real. This sort of thing does not happen in real life. What the hell was happening? Then I scream at Bob and the group that we need to get the hell out of there, but they are already running for the car, leaving their Wiccan book and candle behind. Without hesitation, I run after them, and I jump in the car just as the laughter is becoming deafening. We haul out of there and drive about a mile up the road, and we pull over as Bob is in no condition now to drive. We are all just freaking out. We all get out, pacing around the car, asking each other if we really just heard what we just heard. I tell Bob that I'm sorry, I left his camera behind. He says he doesn't care and that he's not going back for it. At this point, I got my hands on my knees, panting, trying to catch my breath, as I have never been in my life so terrified. That's when all of our chatter stops, as we once again hear the laughter off in the distance, very quietly at first, but slowly and surely getting closer and louder, until once again it becomes deafening. We jump back in the car and speed away. We drive about 6 miles, and for the first 3 miles we can still hear the laughter in the distance with our windows down a little. We all start to calm down by mile 4 when the laughter can no longer be heard, but we have no intention of pulling over again, and Bob's friend is in the passenger seat with his phone, desperately waiting for a signal to pop up. And at about mile 6, Bob's friend says, "Hey, I got full bars," and he hands the phone to Bob. Bob calls a friend of his who is into the occult and well versed and educated in it. As we are driving, he is describing what happened. Bob later told me his friend told him she believed it was the children of Hecate or something like that. I have no idea what Hecate has to do with it, but it sounded more like a guess to me. Anyways, as Bob is on the phone speeding out of the area, me and the 2 other people in the back seat all get a chill at the same time, and they told me later that just like me, the hair on the back of their necks stood up as a loud snapping noise comes from the front end of the car, and Bob's celebrity stops dead in its tracks, and it won't go forward anymore. He tries everything, but the car is just not moving. We later discovered that a tie rod had snapped. Anyway, the friend Bob was talking to on the phone only lived about 20 minutes away, and they said that they were on their way. As we sat in the car, nobody spoke, and after about 3 minutes, we saw a pair of headlights coming down the road towards us. We knew it was too soon to be Bob's friend, but me and Bob thought maybe we could get a ride from a local, so we all unloaded out of the car and stood in front of it, waiting on the vehicle to hopefully stop. The vehicle does not stop, but as it comes into view, it is a beat-up old pickup truck, and it slows down. In the truck, there are 2 men in their 30s or 40s with huge beards. They stare at us and speed up after passing by. I look at Bob, and before I can speak a word, he says what I'm already thinking. Those were the guys from the boat. Before I can say anything back, we see headlights coming from the direction the truck that passed by just went. We went still and quiet as the same guys in the same truck passed by slowly again, staring at us on the side of the road. Bob called his friend back, and he told her to drive like hell and get here now. He hung up, and 4 or 5 minutes go by and we see headlights coming. Relieved, we all get our stuff ready, thinking it's finally Bob's friend. Then his phone rings. It's her, the lady who was coming to get us, telling Bob she took a wrong turn and is going to be about 10 or 15 more minutes before she gets there. Bob hangs up the phone and watches in terror as I do, as the same truck slowly passes by again. This time there's only one of the boatmen in the truck. Now the driver slows to a crawl and he says, "Looks like you fellers could use some help," and then speeds up and drives off. This cemented the fact to Bob and I that we were definitely dealing with the same boat guys. But where the hell did the other one go? Why wasn't he in the passenger seat again? And to make matters worse at this point, something we had almost completely forgotten about due to the boatmen was immediately reminded to us as we began to hear the laughter again off in the distance. It was all around us like before, and over the next few minutes it got closer and closer. I'm almost pissing myself as the sound is getting deafening, and we have nowhere to run this time. Then from behind our car off in the distance, we see 2 sets of headlights come on and 2 vehicles coming towards us, slowly side by side taking up the entire width of the backcountry dirt road coming our way. Laughter now seems to be coming from the woods on both sides of the road, and it sounds like it's zeroing in on us, as if hundreds or thousands of children are within reaching distance. There's no wind, no sound other than the crunch of the tires on the rocky dirt road of the 2 vehicles slowly driving towards us, with our last shred of hope fading away into the laughter of the children and the headlights of the 2 vehicles surely being driven by the boatmen. We are given a reprieve as at this time, coming from the other direction, we see another set of headlights coming fast. We hold our breath. The laughter, the boatmen, what could be next? How will we get out of this? And that is when the vehicle that was coming fast pulls up. It's Bob's friend. She unlocks the doors on her car and rolls her windows down, and starts to tell us to get in, when something happens. The 2 sets of headlights ahead, coming from the other direction, turn off, and Bob's friend says, "Oh my god, you weren't kidding about the laughing kids." She screams at us to get in, and we do. We begin to tell her about the boat guys, and she turns the car around, and no sooner than she starts to drive away, the other 2 sets of headlights come on again. This time with their brights on, and they are about a car lengths behind the car we are all crammed in. I yell to her to go, go, go. I tell her she has to go faster, she has to floor it. And for about the next mile, the vehicles stay on us, then they turn off onto a side road. And for the next 2 miles after that, we can all hear the laughter still way off in the distance with our windows down. Then 3 more miles, the laughter was finally gone. To this day, I have no explanation to what happened, what the laughing children were, why the laughing followed us, if the boatmen were connected to all of this somehow, or if they were merely a coincidence that happened to terrify us at the same time as the paranormal stuff. And if that is the case, why did they not react to the laughing children sound? Is the lantern connected to the laughing children, or did Bob and his group mistakenly call forth the laughing children through their ritual? Like I said, this happened years ago, but I still feel just as terrified now when I tell people about it, or even think about it. I have had constant chills and goosebumps as I write this. If there are any typos or grammar issues, it's probably because I'm shaking. I hope someone who hears this has had a similar experience and can share their story as well. In a way, I believe that would help me deal with the trauma this experience still causes me. To all of you who think the paranormal is just a fun hobby to get your thrills on with, I beg of you, I warn you that we are not prepared for what is really out there. You can think nothing will scare you or harm you, but you are dealing with unknown things. You have no idea how powerful or mundane the paranormal can be. If you use the paranormal as a thrill-seeking hobby, just use caution and always have your vehicle checked out beforehand. And watch out for seemingly sociopathic hillbillies and laughing children. I hope everyone hearing this sleeps well tonight, because I know after telling this story, I won't be having any sleep for the next few days.
I hope you enjoyed that blast from the past. It's weird comparing the old quality of the show to how it is now, and I'm so happy to have come this far with all of you. I can't wait to keep haunting you in the future. Good night. Be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Don't forget, you can send me your scary stories at darknessprevails.org/submit, or stop on by the website to read thousands of other people's true stories. If you want to support the show, you can do so by going to patreon.com/darknessprevails, or browse our merchandise, maybe even buy some, at teespring.com/store/darknessprevails. Now then, as usual, here are my 5 favorite early comments from the previous video about 10 humanoid encounters. Cortez Castillo says, "Me in the shower. Now that's what I call a scary humanoid. You know what they say, if you can't laugh at yourself, well, in this case, be scared of yourself." Lady Cliffhanger says, "I thought it just said top 10 human sightings and was really confused. Sounds like one of those People of Walmart videos." X-Fresh Kate says, "I stopped watching Supergirl to listen to this. Superheroes or super scares? I think you made the right decision." Weber says, "It's a cold day, raining outside. I'm still in my pajamas and Darkness Prevails posts a new video. Perfect. Dang, sounds like a dream come true. I'm absolutely jealous." And Sarah Smith says, "Love you, Darky. You helped me with my depression. I'm so glad I can help, Sarah. It's such a good feeling to always have something to look forward to. And I'm glad I don't have to make you guys wait for weeks at a time to put out a video. I can't wait to read more scary stories just for you guys." Well, that brings us to the end of this episode, but more scary stories are on the way soon, so stay tuned. Until next time, here are the credits to my patrons who continue to donate. Remember, stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.